Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the way that you would outline or start work on a particularly important blog post or page. And this kind of is just an overview of how you would structure it and how you would look to research it. But it also assumes that you're a subject matter expert. And that's really where the rubber hits the road. So it's super important that you actually know what you're talking about, generally speaking, in order to get indexed nowadays from an SEO perspective. But basically, what I want to talk about, and I'm going to take you through the actual writing or brainstorming for an article from a heading perspective, which headings are incredibly important. And that article is going to be nothing to do probably with your brand, but essentially it's an investor's look or an analyst's look at the concept of why Middle Eastern sovereign funds are diversifying so heavily right now, and how that impacts the global economy or how that impacts the markets generally going forward. And the reason I'm choosing that is because really you should be able to understand that when you write an article from the perspective of a subject matter expert, you still have to write it for an audience. And so I particularly chose this is because I would say not a ton of people who are going to see or hear this video are going to have a ton of information or understanding of this topic. And so I want to use that as an example of why and how you would structure an article so that it's able to be adapted to a mainstream reader, even though you're a subject matter expert. So I wouldn't call myself a subject matter expert in Middle Eastern sovereign funds, which are basically state-owned funds that invest in different investments to ensure that there are long-term returns for the stakeholders. And in this case, we're talking about oil-producing countries that would be diversifying away from oil investments as they had typically done and into other markets that are new to them so that they can have a more strategic investment arm going forward as fossil fuels run out or as the demand for fossil fuels changes dramatically over the next 20, 30, 40 years in the world from an energy consumption perspective. Again, not an expert, but writing in the expert capacity because I do have enough information to write this type of information for the reader who would be reading that, and yet we want it to be to the largest audience as possible. So again, for the purposes of showing you how to brainstorm something that you might be an expert on, and yet it also has to hit certain requirements for the reader. So I'm also including an outline about this video. I'll send it to you in hard format, but the goal here is that you can kind of reference it back. But basically, this is my H1. I want to talk about headings. Heading tags are super important. And H1 is going to be your title for the given page or post. In this case, it's why Middle Eastern sovereign funds are diversifying so heavily right now and what it means going forward. Had a typo there. So this is my topic. That's the breadth of my topic. So it's kind of a broad topic. And I want to talk about why headings are so important. They're basically logical indicators of the flow and of the segmentation of a given topic. In this case, this is a pretty broad topic. I would say even though you can use H1 through H6 header tags, you're going to want to use H1 through H3 generally on most pages and posts. You can get into H4s if it's particularly granular. But I did put that information here, and I used another example. In this case, the example I used on the page that I'm going to send you is about why Facebook advertising makes sense, or the specific topic was Facebook has a lot of ways to help small businesses with advertising. So I'm going to reference both of these as we go, but I want to show you in real time how I might write this article, having done no research on it, just having my base level information and knowledge about the specific topic. So as a subject matter expert, for lack of a better term, in the topic I'm writing about, here's how I would brainstorm in real time. And so the goal as you read this that I'm going to include with it is to understand how I came up with that context and how I'm structuring it for the mainstream reader, because we want it, after all, to not alienate anybody, and we want to be able to open it up to all audiences that could be a potential conversion. So in the case of wherever your business is, the goal here is to take something that you're a subject matter expert in and turn it into something that's completely digestible by broad audiences. Okay, and so there's certain notes. One note is that the given keywords should be, the most comprehensive piece of work on the internet for the topic. Obviously, I'm not going to. There are white papers that are probably 80 or 90 pages long that talk about Middle Eastern sovereign funds diversifying. I'm not writing an 80-page white paper. I'm writing a maybe 3,000 word article about this so that I can use it as a conversion piece for those who are interested in hearing more about the services I offer as a consultant. Number two would be headings being logical indicators of the flow and of the segmentization or the segmenting of a specific topic so that it cuts down the breadth into more digestible areas. The third one would be the importance of your own authority, your research, your information, your insights from an SEO perspective, why you would index over someone else. So that is part of what we're going to talk about as we write this. And I realize it's probably going to be a little bit longer video than normal, but it's, again, background information so that you understand the concepts. Okay, and then the fourth point I want to make in the video is that you would structure this topical concept logically for the mainstream. And then 5, how you might look at this between an opinion style or a commentary, fact-based style, or a news style, or an evergreen or a timely style of content, and how that would vary, between those different topics. Again, this is probably going to be about a 30-minute video, but, I just want to make sure that the information is there, again, as comprehensively as possible so that you understand why we do the things we do from an SEO perspective when it comes to content. Okay, so just to kind of get into it, I want to just show you, obviously, we know the breadth here is going to be pretty deep. So we're going to use some H2. So this is my H1 here. And H1 is generally going to be the name of your page, and it's going to be the general topic breadth. You generally want to have paragraphs in between each heading tag, even if it is H1 to H2, etc. But usually you can get away with an H1 directly to an H2 on an article. In this case, I'm going to give an intro paragraph just to say, here's what I'm talking about. Then I'm going to go into my H2, which is going to be really the point of the intro, and talk about it, again, at a slightly more granular level, but also alluding to the H1, right? So I might say something like this as my first H2. Traditionally, heavy oil producing nations are looking at ways to diversify their total investment portfolios away from such a heavy oil basis into more arenas. Okay. Obviously, we may need some work on some of this, but just from a train of thought, in the moment concept, that's what I'm talking about today. So I want to basically put it out there as my H2. Okay, within that H2, I'm going to have a paragraph probably here that talks about what I mean by that. Then I'm probably going to use an H3 in this case, and I'm going to say that H3 is recent acquisitions and movements away from oil shows oil producers understand the waning value of peak oil, or something to that effect. Within that, I might have an H4. And by the way, I want to be clear, an H4 is something we rarely use. It really doesn't factor as heavily. If you're getting into that kind of granularity, you really should have a different topic. Your topic's too broad. And in this case, the only reason why I might go in an H4 is because I want to, again, speak to what I call point 3 on that other document. So over here, point 3, the importance of the authority, research, information, and insights from an SEO perspective. This is used as a piece, I think, in the future for me as a consultant who can talk about these types of things. And so including an H4 might help convert a consumer to make a phone call to me and consider me as a consultant on the topic, because I do talk with quite a bit of granularity, right? So in this case, I might say H4, something like Manchester United Football Club bid. I might also say H4, something like, let's see, Lazard talks with Sovereign Fund. And this speaks to, again, some of the very specific, timely content. Now, when we write SEO content, we generally want it to be timeless, meaning that even though something has happened in the news, we're not heavily focused on just that part of it. Because once something goes out of the news, it's much less likely to be indexed by Google or whoever, whatever search engine, if it only or mostly talks about timely content. So timely being things that are happening in the here and now. They are important for getting indexed sometimes, but they're not the basis by which we want to spend a ton of time to write an article. If we're spending, say, 3-4 hours on an article or on a piece of content, we want it to be able to last as long as possible. So we try and skew it towards the more timeless factors, i.e., I want something that's going to last 30 years from the perspective of a consultant trying to get a client in. I want it to be timeless to the reader 5 years at least in the future. In this case, these are things that happen. The Lazard talks that I might talk about, that happened literally today within the last 3 hours on the markets, that this consultant Lazard is talking with the Sovereign Fund, right? So having that information in there might speak from a conversion perspective to those who are aware of this, who see it and weren't sure if I was the guy to talk to. They might see this and say, wow, this person has some insights, being that they're releasing a piece of content within a day of that actually happening, and they're speaking at a high level about it, right? So we might have some other H4s in there, but generally most of what can be talked about would be in a paragraph or 2 or 3 within the H3. In this case, recent acquisitions and movements away from oil shows that oil producers, as in countries, understand the waning value of peak oil. Now, again, we're talking about an H2, and we want to fully explore an H2 before we move on from the H2, right? So even though we might have 3 or 4 or 5 H2s, we don't want to just put a little piecemeal concept below the H2 and the H3 and just say, inside the H3, I should say, and just say, oh, well, this is all we're going to talk about, even though we made this broad topic here. Right? So we might continue to say something like this as an H3. We might say something to the effect of, as solar and wind generation ramps up in developed and developing countries, the writing is on the wall for OPEC and other oil cartels, or something to that effect, right? Obviously, some of the verbiage might change as we edit. Some of this, for instance, cartel has a negative connotation. It might be viewed improperly by a certain subset of readers that I want. So as I edit it later on, after I've gotten the bulk of the content, say 3, 4, 5,000 words up, in this case, it's probably going to be between 2,500 and 5,500 words. I may want to change some of the verbiage because those headers will index importantly, and I don't want to have the wrong connotation associated with my conversion. Okay, so also as we talk, we might look at another H3 as something like, because we're still trying to cover all of this, right? That basically heavy oil producing nations are looking at ways to diversify. We might talk about the growth of sovereign wealth funds in the past 25 years for countries that produce oil. Then what we might do is, again, because of the specificity of this article and who I'm trying to gain as a potential conversion, I might be looking at, and I don't know yet, but I might be looking at something like going into a deeper dive about maybe 3 or 4 paragraphs of Saudi Arabia or Qatar or something like that, right? So we might talk about the specifics of what's happening there. We might even talk about something like this, another H3, how whole regions are changing their dynamism regarding investments on the public stage, right? And I might even, again, go a little bit further if I have to. And again, I'm not advocating for H4s. I'm showing you where you would get into granularity here. Most articles that I write may have 1 or 2 H4s at most. They don't typically have 6 or 7 or 10 like you might see in an article like this. But I also think it's important when you need to go into granularity that you use an H4 properly. Okay, so in this case, I might say how Turkey, as in the country of Turkey, is changing its public persona to cater to outside investment. So in this case, that's almost as an aside, right? Because Turkey's not necessarily a heavy oil producing country. And while it is regionally linked, you may not see somebody talk about Turkey in the same context that you would see somebody talking about Qatar or Saudi Arabia or UAE or something like that from the oil production perspective, right? So again, very important that we identify the audience that's going to want to use this information and how we might convert them in talking about these different pieces of information. So it's very, very important to, as we form the outline of this, very important for us to be aware of where it's actually going to and why we want to talk about certain things versus other things. So in this case, we would talk about that. Then I'm going to go back. Now I've sufficiently covered the concept, I think, that, the basic concept of they're going away from this, right? Okay. Now I think what I want to talk about to further enhance the article is I want to go to an H2 and I want to talk about what are the types of investments that sovereign wealth funds are utilizing to improve their diversification and help promote a more positive image. Okay. So now I might want to talk about an H3 of, and in this case, I'm not going to go into the granularity of it, but let's say how oil producers are getting in on the Solar Act, right? So we might talk a little bit about how oil is required to build solar panels, and that's basically like selling yourself out of a business that you already make tons of money off of into another business that you don't make as much money off of. And yet it's important to start talking about some of those concepts because there's a sea change in the global energy market. So that is actually my next H3, the sea change in the global energy consumption market. Then I might also talk about what else is oil going to be used for when we all drive electric cars and all mass transport is using less fossil derived energy sources. So we might write 2 or 3 paragraphs about each of those and cover that. And again, this particular audience that I'm writing to, I need to show them the strength of my understanding. And so going a little bit more granular is important. But it's also important not to lose the reader, right? And so at some point, if I get too far out of the breadth of this, I'm really going to lose the reader, right? And so I think what I'd like to do is I want a conversion at some point with this writing piece, right? So I want to probably wrap it up and then say, for more information, blah, blah, blah. So I think my wrap up is going to go to an H2, and it's going to be something like case studies in the early efficacy of sovereign wealth funds as it relates to non-oil centric investments. Okay, so that's going to probably be my last one. I'm going to actually, thinking about it, that'll probably be my last section. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another H2 because I think it's important as I'm reading through this. The H2 I want to add here is what are the fund managers and big financial companies contributing to this change in diversification. And then probably I'll have one H3 because I want to go into it, but I don't want to go super far into it. What JP Morgan is doing for sovereign wealth funds to bring them out of the oil economy less injured as we make a global energy transition. Okay, so that is my outline, and I might have case study 1, which probably will be a paragraph or 2 and a link to a different post. Then I'll have H3, case study 2, and then copy, paste, and then I'll have another H3. And the reason I'm doing 3 of these is because, again, I want to capture their attention and convince them that I am a reputable source of information for this, and eventually trying to get them to convert to paying me to consult them on some concept that is affiliated with this aspect. Probably financial markets, content consulting, or probably investment related consulting as it relates to SEO, because that's in my wheelhouse. Not necessarily as a investment consultant. So I think it's important to, again, talk about the specifics, but don't go too granular. Okay, so I want to touch back on a couple of these things real quick. We'll end up talking about number 5 here in a minute, but I want to go through one more concept, and that is the Facebook concept. So I laid out another one here just as an example. The breadth of the topic would be Facebook has a lot of ways to help small businesses with advertising. The H2 underneath that would be Facebook and Instagram offer many opportunities to help small businesses both locally and globally. And then within that H2, I'm going to have 4 H3s. So one of them is going to be Facebook allows you to segment audiences by the things they like. Facebook allows you to get cheap clicks to an offer so you can use it for direct-to-consumer products and services easily. Facebook has a segmenting ability to target local consumers more easily and with more granularity than Google. H4 within that one, with Google, you aren't able to easily segment demographics as well as with Facebook by comparison. And then back to wrap it up for this H2, it'll be Facebook ads can be a quick and easy way to build a more global audience through like-minded activities and concepts, offers a less expensive way to target marketing channels and other options. This is probably a bit long in the tooth for an H3 article or H3 heading, but generally speaking, you just want to deliver on content. So I'm okay with it. I'm going to go back to an H2, which segments my H1 here, right? That Facebook has lots of ways for small businesses to help them with advertising. So my H2 would be Instagram is particularly good for video and picture related content because the clicks are cheap and easy to get. And that type of content is easy to improve engagement with. Again, a little long in the tooth for an H2, but I think if you're delivering on content, that's going to sort itself out. From the perspective of an H2, obviously the H1 talks about Facebook, but it's public knowledge that Facebook essentially owns Instagram. It's a spinoff from the original parent company, blah, blah. So we're including it because they're so linked together, not to mention the different ads interfaces are connected pretty heavily. Okay, so within that, I'm going to have 2 H3s. So using pictures on Instagram to further your client marketing. And then competitors like TikTok might be gaining ground on Facebook and Instagram, but there's still a lot of upside for small businesses who want to target potential customers via Facebook and Insta. Using different terminology that means the same thing, i.e. FB and Insta, can go to some credibility of the reader. It can also help get you index better because Google sees you using rich content that is associated already with their algorithm and how it hunts for keywords when it crawls. I'm going to go back out to the H2, popular ways to target and segment audiences to realize better buy-through on Facebook ads platforms. And the reason I'm doing this is some of it is theory, right? A lot of this is theory or commentary. This is more practical, right? And when you add practical knowledge into an article, you tend to get some of the rich snippets a little bit better on Google, but not only the rich snippets, you also have a lot better engagement if you set it up properly with the reader, especially when you're talking about long form content. If you can keep them motivated to read through to this point and then you start adding in practical content, you're going to keep coming back and back and back to listen to what you have to do because you're giving them some actionable advice. Okay, so in this case, it's going to be using a pure demographic play, how to segment by demographic to find your sweet spot. Again, these are all off the top of my head. I didn't do any research for this particular article. It's more just to show you have to be able to talk at a mainstream level, even though you're a subject matter expert. And those that are searching for terms like this article would be engaging or getting in the search for are going to have enough information to understand what you're talking about, but they also want to be spoken to like a normal consumer. And so we have to be not too hardcore about what we're saying in our titling and in our headers. So combining likes and conversion ads to improve total marketing capacity and to build your brand more holistically with the Meta, FB, Insta. Then another H3, marketing directly to groups or users of groups and like industries or verticals on Facebook. And then I'm going to wrap up with an H2 that says Facebook's developing the metaverse. What does advertising look like in the future? Facebook going back from a practical play to a theoretical play, which can keep people interested in coming back to come to you as somebody who produces content. So anyway, last thing I want to talk about in this video is the difference between opinion, fact-based commentary, news, evergreen, timely, and other types of content. Both of these articles have a more practical approach, and I just want to reiterate the concept for those that haven't heard it, that generative AI is going to play a big role in how and what types of content get into the search engine pages, the results pages in the future. Right now, essentially, Google is rolling out a new update. They started on May 10th that will push generative AI results higher up from their own internal sources. So if you're answering a question that can be answered in less than a paragraph, let's say, or less than 2 paragraphs, you're generally not going to be competitive anymore. So if it's like a frequently asked question that doesn't apply to your specific service or your specific product, chances are Google's not going to place you number 1 on that SERP. So I would avoid writing content that is very short form and answers quick questions. What I would do instead is I would lean towards timeless, long form content like this that shows actual insight and knowledge that you can't get from just some random chat GPT-4 or whatever, right? If you're doing something that you're generating AI content for, it's not that Google won't rank it. It's that it will never be the number 1 most comprehensive or best answer for a specific given query. And so eventually, even if you rank it early on, it won't rank forever. And not only will it not rank forever, you probably won't convert anyone because everyone's going to get tired of hearing that same concept or that same voice that is coming through from ChatGPT or other large language model driven generative AI content. So it's very important to look at what types of stuff you're writing. Opinion will never go away. Everyone who seeks opinion will always seek opinion. They're not going to seek, quote unquote, the opinion of a chat GPT because they can do that on their own and they don't need to read it. They can just be given it. They're going to seek opinion that has long format, has valuable insights, etc. News is never going to go away. People will always want to know what's happening, but you're also going to compete with AI and with news organizations that have vastly bigger budgets than you. So trying to break news on anything other than the most niche of topics or not doing a deep dive on that news headline is just going to be a loss in time for you. You're just going to lose money and time and effort in doing that. Now, if you go deep dive on the news, like say, for instance, this Lazard thing might only be covered on Bloomberg. So I'm competing with one company. And the people that are going to Bloomberg for information aren't going to me as a consultant for information. So if I've got 4 paragraphs on the sovereign fund talking about buying out Lazard and why that makes sense for them in the long term or why that's a good play for them, I might be the number 1 on Google for that, even though Bloomberg's 10 times the size, 1,000 times the size of my organization, right? So when you look at it, you can compete with the big players as long as you're utilizing a proper structure and you're giving insights and value. Also, if this turns out to have a very timeless commentary around the specifics that are timely, i.e., I make a good call on the Manchester United Football Club bid, or I make a good call on the Lazard buyout from a sovereign fund, that's going to bode well for me, both from a Google indexing perspective, but especially from a conversion perspective. Because as it indexes higher, people are going to see, wow, this person made that call in June, mid-June of 2023, and it's still timely in, 10 years later or 4 years later or whatever it is, right? And so being first to market, but also being best in class on market is going to be important. And that goes the same way for content. So anyway, just some concepts there. Again, I tried to do this stream of consciousness so you could see, even though I'm not a 100% subject matter expert, I'm not getting hired by JP Morgan to run their sovereign fund investing portfolio, but I do get hired by companies all the time to talk about those things in content online. So I do have a subject matter expertise that fits really well with the type of client that I'm looking to get here. But the goal here was to say, in a stream of consciousness, what would I structure this like? And how would I come up with my ability to research? I don't necessarily have to research this. I'll probably write this on the fly, may do 5 or 6 minutes of fact checking, but generally this is something that's right up my alley, so I can do that. And the same would be true for something like this, which is why it only took me a few minutes to kind of lay it out. So again, the goal here is to say, if you're a subject matter expert, which most of my clientele is, I'm trying to teach you how to utilize your subject matter expertise to get value from the layout and style and format of the content you're writing. And if you're a client of mine and you have a SEO roadmap, there is a high likelihood of giving you a large amount of keywords from which to derive content, or at least giving you some ideas on doing that. And so let's use that. Let's utilize this hand in hand with those keywords or those brainstorming projects that talk about, what kind of content are you going to deliver, whether it be video, whether it be, article, whether it be, audio, podcasting, whatever. All of these things are going to utilize the same logical flow pattern and the same comprehensiveness background as the others. And that's important for ranking. So anyway, I appreciate you spending some time here. I know it's a long video. Hopefully it gives you some context, and we'll talk again soon.